Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. My name is Rebecca Ravenbird and today I am here with Emerald Hunters and we are going to show you how to line up your dressage line properly. So the first question is about, well, why is it important to line up properly? There's a few reasons why we should line up in a very specific way. So the first reason is about etiquette. So having good etiquette in the arena helps other people prepare for the practice and it demonstrates respect for the other people using the same space as you. So right now we are in the club arena. However, if we were in the public riding arena, as you know, a lot of people would be doing lessons in there or doing role plays, and so you're sharing the space with other people. So having good lineup etiquette shows respect for other people that are using the same space as you. The next reason why we should learn how to line up properly is because of cleanliness. It makes it really easy for the commander to see who is available during the practice and who's getting ready, and it also demonstrates your club's professionalism and attention to detail. Finally, lining up properly allows us to set up for success. So when we all collectively set up for success, that means our gaps will not be heavily or negatively affected when starting to trot forward. Before you even line up your club in the proper order that you want them to start moving, we have to learn about how to line up on the wall. So generally, what I do with my club is that we line up at a certain letter, and right now we are currently lined up at H for hunters. Pick a wall, pick a letter, and your club is going to line up NTT flat along the wall. So as you can see, we are all side by side here, NTT flat, and none of us are crashing into each other, none of us are clumping, and we're all having our back hooves lined up properly against the wall. We all look very nice and organized here. So you always want to line up in the area or the letter that your instructor says so, because if you have other people running around the arena or setting up in different places, people who are coming into the practice slightly later are actually going to be confused about where they're supposed to be. So, for example, let's say that I'm about to come into the club riding arena and my instructor said we needed to line up at H. Okay, so I think some people are already here. And let's see if everyone is at the proper place. Okay, so my instructor said that we needed to line up at H, but nobody's at H. So we have some people running around and there's some people I can't even see. There's somebody over here in the stands and somebody's jumping around. Somebody's actually at A, so I think, are we supposed to be at A? I'm actually not sure. So again, that's why it's really important to have everybody lining up in the exact same place, so that way you as the person coming into the practice are not confused about where to go. Alrighty, so the next thing that's really important about lining up your club is understanding the different factors that impact your lineup order. So there is about 5 different factors that impact how you're going to line up your club, and that is your horse's mood, your horse's level, your character level, making sure everybody has the same gear, and finally lag. Understanding lag is really important, so that way someone who's lagging is not a line leader. So ideally, everybody in your club is close to the same level or not having major level gaps and has all the same gear and all of their horses are maxed and happy. However, that's not always the case. So your horse's mood has the biggest impact on speed, and that's even bigger than your horse's character level or your gear or anything like that. So again, your horse's mood impacts your speed the most. So make sure your horse is completely all the way happy here, right? So you have your full bars here. Now, sometimes that may just not be the case. So if we take a look at this rider here, Emily Ponycraft, her horse is maxed. However, if we inspect further, we are going to notice that her horse is 1 down from happy. So we're about a yellow-faced happy. So even being one bar down from full happiness will decrease your speed by quite a bit, by I think about 20%. So it is super important that your horses are maxed and happy. So on the screen right now, I'm actually going to put a few scenarios, and I'm going to be crediting PQL because I did ask for their advice on how to properly line up your club. So again, a 20% decrease in speed if your horse's mood is 1 bar down from fully happy. This definitely affects your horse's response time for gait changes and turning, and it definitely impacts your more gaps. So now we're going to get into the fun part, is where you actually get to move the riders around and put them into order. So you always want your fastest person or the highest level person as your line leader. There are some rare situations where the fastest person, if they're level 21 but they're brand new to the club, they actually need to go second in line, because you actually do need one person at least in the front to properly lead your club, so that way they know exactly what lines to use and what spacing to use. So in the event that you have someone who's a higher level than an existing member and they're brand new to the club, you do want to put them in second. So another rare situation is make sure that your line leader is actually comfortable leading the line. If you're got a brand new person and they've never led a line before, that can be kind of intimidating. So make sure you have somebody who's comfortable leading the line and is also either the fastest or just the most comfortable. So now we're going to go ahead and call our order. So if you are level 20, maxed and happy, step forward, pre-go. Okay, so as you can see, we had two different riders step forward here because they meet all of the requirements. So they are level 20, they are maxed, and their horse is fully happy. So if you do not meet any one of those requirements, then you would stay back, okay? So I do know that both Ruby and Kathy meet both of those requirements, and I know that they tend not to lag. So I can order them in whatever order I want, but also making sure that we have a confident line leader. So for right now, we're going to have Ruby and then Kathy, please line up at E. Okay, and they are going to go ahead and run to their spots because that helps with the efficiency of the practice. So moving as quickly as possible will make sure that your practice starts and ends on time. Okay, and so now we're going to continue calling until everybody is available and ready to be set up in line. Now, we only have 5 riders here. However, if you have a much bigger club, you'll have to continue calling out our line orders. So if you're level 19, maxed and happy, step forward, pre-go. Okay, so we noticed that nobody stepped forward. However, I do know my rider here, Jupiter, is level 20. And maxed. However, this horse, again, is yellow-faced happy. So I think what we'll go ahead and do is we'll have Jupiter and Eminem step forward, please. So again, these two riders are the same stats, so they're level 20 and they're level 15, but they're both sad. So we're gonna go ahead and have Jupiter then Eminem go and line up. And then finally, since we can inspect Maddie now, so we see that Maddie is level 16, so quite a bit lower, but her horse is nicely maxed. Let's see if her horse is happy. Yes. So we'll have Maddie go next. So as a commander, it is important that eventually all of your riders will have experience with line leading. So eventually I would want Maddie to be a line leader and Eminem to be a line leader. And then I know Jupiter, Kathy, and Ruby have had some line leading experience, so I know that they can comfortably lead lines. So the next important piece of information is, why should you stand NTT and not in any other position? So NTT, both in my personal opinion as well as some logistical reasons, NTT is the cleanest method for lining up, and it actually accommodates most horses' headsets. So you notice that the Andalusian, they kind of hold their necks at a sort of a medium angle. They don't hold their heads too high or too low or anything like that. So you notice that most of our riders here look pretty nice, right? We are using NTT, nose to tail. So that's what NTT stands for. So we use a horse tail bow to help give riders a very clear marker of where to put themselves, but a tail bow is not required as long as you're able to position your horse's nose right on the very tippy top of the tail of the person in front of you. So the one exception to the NTT rule is the Gen 3 Frisians. You just saw this horse and this horse do the bowing animation that they do when they're idling, and also we now have the Piaffe over here. So whenever these horses do those animations, it tends to look like they're just kind of crashing into each other if you are completely NTT with the other riders. Additionally, the Frisians hold their necks up really high, so it can actually be kind of challenging to see if you're actually NTT with the person in front of you. So again, as an exception to the NTT rule, if you have the Gen 3 Frisian, see here we go, we're overlapping here a little bit. If you have a Gen 3 Frisian, we recommend you stand a little bit further backwards behind the person in front of you to have about maybe a character space of distance between you and the next person. So everybody except for Maddie, go ahead and back up a little bit so that you are a character space away. So right about here, now you can see this horse doing the bowing animation and this horse is doing the pee-off. So they are no longer running into each other. So visually, this is what we would prefer if you have a Gen 3 Frisian. And again, that's an exception to the NTT rule. So now we have Gen 3 Arabians. That's another popular dressage horse lately. So they have a nice headset, but they do have this standing forward animation where their nose goes past their NTT. So right now they are NTT, but a moment ago, and you see it again right now, the horse's nose is going past the tail bow. So with the Arabians, again, I do recommend that you stand a little bit behind the tail bow rather than right on NTT. So go ahead and adjust yourselves. All right, so now we are standing behind the tail here, and let's see if one of these horses goes into the standing forward animation. So with this additional spacing between the riders, it's about, again, a character space. So as you can see, yep, the horse is standing forward right now, and their horse is not crashing into the rump of the next person. So again, stand a little bit further behind the tail if you're riding a Gen 3 Arabian. So one final exception to the NTT rule is the American quarter horse. Now, I know these horses are not popular for dressage. However, if you are doing Western drill or Western drill team, you may need to line up your quarter horses as such. So with the quarter horses, their heads are really low compared to like the Andalusian or the Frisian you saw earlier. So you can actually have your horse's forehead touching the tail of the person in front of you. We like to call this FTT, forehead touching tail. So I already mentioned 2 reasons why we should be standing NTT, but the biggest reason why you should stand NTT is so that when you start to trot forward, your gaps will be more precise when you start to pick up the trot. So if you're standing too close to the person in front of you, you may actually have gaps that are too tight, and then you have to walk or wiggle or slow down in some other way, and that will cause a ripple effect for the people behind you. Standing too far away can also cause a ripple effect in terms of adjusting gaps, though it's not going to be as extreme as having to slow down if your gaps are too tight. So now what we're doing is we are lining up about a character space away from the person in front of us. So we are behind the tail, that's for sure. So again, this is not as bad as being OT like this, or even further up than that. But again, it just will take more time for me to catch up with gaps. So here we go, pick up trot set, pick up trot, pre, and go. So here, as you can see, I'm about a half horse away from Kathy, and I need to majorly canter up, so I had to take about 3 strides just to catch up with Kathy, and that means the people behind me are going to have to do the same thing. So the next thing that's really important about lining up is making sure that getting into your spot is done as quickly and efficiently as possible. So right now we are sort of clumping over here and we have major gaps over here, and that doesn't look like NTT. So what you want to do is you want to use your forward and your backwards keys to line up into your spot. So go ahead everybody and adjust to NTT right now. Alright, so as you can see, everybody is moving around and trying to find their spot, but it's taking them a really long time to get into that spot. So everyone is clumping, everyone's moving forwards and backwards too much or too far, and it's just taking a really long time for them to get set up. So the reason why this is taking so long is because they're taking multiple steps to try to get into their spot, and they're not pressing their keys quite fast enough to make their horse stop or go forward enough steps to get into their spot. So here's what I would like everybody to do. Please halt, and we're going to do a little exercise to help you practice moving a teeny tiny bit. Okay, so the way to make teeny tiny small little walk steps to adjust into your spot is to use the double hand method. So everybody, I would like for you to take your left hand and put one finger on the W key or your up arrow key, and then you're going to take your right hand and your first finger on your right hand, and that's going to go on the down key or the S key. And I want you to practice using each of those fingers individually and very quickly pressing up, down, up, down, up, down. So WS, WS, up, down, up, down. And so you see on my screen that my horse is barely moving its legs. It's barely starting to walk forward. If you do this fast enough on my screen, all you're going to do is slide. So you just saw Maddie right there is sliding. Yep, so teeny tiny slides right there. So don't forget also too to work on going backwards. So once you've done some up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, remember to go down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, and take teeny tiny backward steps. So it's better to do a lot of little mini walk steps forward rather than lots of big walk steps forward, so that way everybody gets into their spot a lot faster. So now that you guys know that strategy, I would like for you to please reset in the original line order and get into your spots as quickly as possible using that method. Okay, so already Kathy's in her spot. And now Jupiter is going to take a little mini backward step right there and a mini walk step forward. Very nice. Maddie is going to do the same thing. Teeny tiny walk steps forward. Now you may need to take some walk steps back. Walk step back. There you go. Do you see how much faster that was? Everybody was able to get into their spot, I think, within 30 seconds. So that was pretty quick. Obviously, if you have a much longer line, it will take longer just for the sheer amount of people. But again, the idea is to move as efficiently as possible. At this point, our riders do look nice and NTT with each other, but uh-oh, take a look at this. All of our riders are quite crooked and they're not straight behind our line leader. So straightness is also another really important factor when trying to line up with your club, because if you're slanted off to the side like this and you start to trot forward, well, then you need to tap forward and then tap to the side to try to get back onto your line right here. So straightness is also really important. So you do want to make sure that you're using some form of spacing or arena line. So we do use these bright dots in the arena to help us with our straightness. You want to be looking ahead of the person in front of you and not necessarily look at the person in front of you when you're trying to look for your straightness. So I'm trying to look ahead of all of these riders here to look at these bright dots that are over this way, and that's going to help me with my straightness. So I'd like everybody to please go ahead and straighten yourselves out and make sure you're right exactly centered on these bright dots, and then use that method I taught you earlier about making teeny tiny steps to make sure that you are NTT with the person in front of you. Tilt as necessary, or back up and tilt as necessary, but again, try to do it as efficiently as possible. And I think we're there, so that took about 10 seconds or so, and let's take a look at our line now. Yeah, this is absolutely beautiful. Look at that straightness. So again, all of us are trying to look at the arena line on the ground rather than the person in front of us to determine our straightness. So again, as I was mentioning about moving too far forward and then having to move backwards, it's also really important that you're not wiggling in your spot, because there are people behind you that are trying to rely on you to get into their spot. So if you're constantly moving around, as you can see, this tailboat is moving all over the place. And so if I had somebody behind me right here, they would have a really hard time trying to find their spot because I'm moving around too much. All right, so now that we have gone over all of these different factors and methods for getting your line set up, it's time to trot forward. So you want to ensure that your line order is accurate by having the riders move forward and then ask them if they need to switch places with somebody else. So this is what we like to call a speed test. So you're going to set your your original line order, and then if you notice anyone who is lagging or faster than somebody else for some reason, you'll ask that person to step out and then find a different place in line. Alright, so it looks like on my screen, generally the line order is okay. However, I noticed that my second rider in line, Kathy, is kind of creeping up on Ruby. So it looks like Kathy is actually a little bit faster than Ruby. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Ruby walk, Kathy canter forward. So that way they switch spots and then fix gaps immediately. Okay, so now this looks a little bit better, right? So now Ruby isn't necessarily creeping up on Kathy. Ruby is actually having to catch up to Kathy because Kathy, I guess, is lagging a little bit, and she is actually no, Kathy is a little bit faster than Ruby, and therefore Ruby is having to canter forward to compensate for gaps there. So this is one way of doing the speed test. So just having our riders trot with each other using your typical gaps and seeing if anybody is passing anyone else or being really, really slow or anything like that. Alright, so another version of a speed test is to basically do a comb at the walk, and our line leader is over here. The person that we assigned to be the first and fastest line leader is right over here, and then everyone else gets essentially progressively slower as you go this way. So the idea is that when everybody is in a comb, we should see our line leader slightly ahead of the last person, because I'm going to ask them to not adjust. So do not adjust for comb alignment where you have to like trot forward or anything. So everybody is just going to walk, and also do not wiggle your horse because that will slow you down. We want to see what everyone's raw speed is. So again, we should have our line leaders progressively a little bit faster, right? So you see our two line leaders are slightly ahead of the others, okay? And so if that's the case, that means you set up your line correctly. However, if we had perhaps this middle person right here, Emily Ponycraft, if she was way ahead of our two line leaders, that means I set up the line incorrectly, and she would need to go either at the very, very front or near the very front. Alright everybody, that is going to be the end of today's tutorial. I hope it was very in-depth and informative for you. Let me know if you learned something new today in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to my channel if you would like to watch more tutorial videos like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye! Staleness? You should see, okay, because I have a horse named Potato Chip, and he's a quarter horse, and he's the Palomino quarter horse, and because he's like depressed, he's a stale potato chip.